"50 years ago, psychologists didn't think that dads were all that important when it came to raising children. Mothers were responsible for nearly everything: pregnancy, childbirth, pretty much all childcare. And dads, well, they had a pretty enjoyable role at the beginning. And then they taught their sons how to be men, how to shave. Actually, that was it. That's the end of the list. Fun part, shave. But around 1970, some psychologists thought we should put numbers on how involved fathers actually were. And this study started the story that I'm going to tell today, a story of what psychologists like myself are learning about the role that modern fathers are playing in child development. And this story starts in Boston with a bunch of newborn babies wearing microphones. So these researchers out of Boston University use these microphones to record parents' speech to their children for several days over the first 3 months of those children's lives. And then they took those tapes and asked a really simple question. How much time per day did dads spend talking to their babies? So I want you to take a moment, think of what did they find? How long did dads spend? Got a number in your head? Well, here's what they found. Dads spent, on average, 37.7 seconds per day talking to their children. The most involved father in this study spent less than 10.5 minutes per day talking to his newborn baby. Of course, as kids grew, dads did talk to them more. The daddy contract, after all, requires that if a child says, "Dad, I'm hungry," he has to respond, "Hi, hungry, I'm Dad." It's bad, it's in the contract, I apologize. But what would happen is over time, as these children learned more and more words, these dads became increasingly out of touch with the things that their children could actually say. And that's horrible, right? I mean, if we were going to write a parenting manual, we wouldn't have a chapter on ignoring your kids. So some psychologists wanted to know what kind of an effect this could have on children, but not in the way that you might think. The counterintuitive question that one psychologist asked was this: is there a silver lining, some kind of a benefit to having a 37-second dad? This researcher, Berko Gleason, is among the most influential language researchers in psychology's history. And she wondered whether or not children of these out-of-touch dads would actually be more advanced in their own language abilities. So to give you a sense of what this might look like, I want you to take a moment and imagine that you are a 37-second dad. And you come home after work, and your daughter's sitting there in the hallway. She's got some red blocks, and she's holding them up. And you look at her, and you say, "Oh, that's nice. What's that?" And she replies in her insanely cute voice,
"Shopping."
"Oh, that's nice. What's that again?" And so she repeats herself.
"Shopping."
"Oh, okay. One more time." And this goes back and forth for a while until mom comes in and says, "Oh, sweetheart, are you showing daddy your strawberries?" And now that you know that it's strawberries, you can hear when my oldest daughter, who is just 1 at the time, said it. Strawberries.
"Shopping."
But this dad didn't hear strawberries. He heard gibberish, just like a stranger would. And he walks away thinking that those were 37 pretty challenging seconds. But what Gleason realized about interactions like these was that when this dad didn't understand his child, he asked her to repeat herself, to speak more clearly. And she wondered if interactions like this would actually increase children's language ability by forcing them to speak more clearly. In this way, she wanted to know whether or not fathers can be seen as a bridge to the outside world. Because the improved language that follows this toddler's interaction with her dad would pay off when talking to strangers who don't know the unique way that she says strawberries. So, researchers have actually found support for Gleason's hypothesis. And researchers have found that compared to moms, dads are more likely to ask kids to repeat themselves, to use more advanced language, to provide more details when speaking. Fathers are more likely to use advanced vocabulary with their children. But the average dad today isn't the 37-second father of yesteryear. The amount of time dads spend with their children has increased over 50% since the 1970s. And although dads, they're not nearly as involved as moms, and that's even after controlling for work hours, by the way, it's at least movement in the right direction. But this movement has brought some confusion in with it. What exactly is a father's role? I see this confusion in recent research on dads, where more new fathers say they want to be the opposite of their fathers than to emulate them. And I also see this confusion in my students. Every fall, I have the unique privilege to talk to 40 young men about fatherhood. And I have this front row seat to the kinds of questions that young men in the 21st century are asking about fatherhood. They come into my class with all sorts of questions. Questions like, how can I be different or even better than my dad? Is there even a special role for dads, other than telling bad jokes or embarrassing your kids? So they're confused about a father's role. One time, actually, on the first day of class, I asked my students to describe what a father is. And a student in the back just shrugged and said, I don't know. Go ask your mother. So they're not getting the daddy script from their own fathers. But at least their fathers are more involved than the generation of fathers before them. But this increase in involvement actually raises a couple of questions. The first question is, could this be bad? I mean, as dads are more in touch with what their children could actually say, will they stop pushing their language abilities? So far, the answer to that question seems to be no. Dads are more likely to use and demand advanced language out of their children. The second question, though, is what are they doing with this increased time? So research shows that the vast majority of things that moms and dads do are the same, have the same kind of impact. But there is one clear and consistent finding, which is that dads are more likely than moms to use that time engaged in rough and tumble play or roughhousing. And that raises another question. Is play another bridge to the outside world? Could roughhousing be doing something to prepare children better for life outside of the home? So I want to stress that research on this question is still young, and so we're not certain of the answers. But they seem to have something to do with child aviation. So to think about whether flying children are crossing bridges, I want you to consider this finding. Children of fathers who roughhouse with them are rated by their teachers as being more socially competent. And at first glance, that seems odd. I mean, how can being tossed around by your dad possibly help you make friends? So to wrap our minds around this finding, let's take a moment to consider what could be racing through this girl's head right here. I'd bet that she's having fun. Right? I'd also bet that deep down, she's feeling a bit of fear. I mean, there isn't anything she can do at this point to avoid a trip to the hospital. Her safety is quite literally in her dad's hands, or will be if he catches her. And so hopefully she'll learn that she can trust her dad because of this kind of an interaction. But more to the point, researchers think she's learning something very important about herself, and this is it. She doesn't need to be afraid of a little bit of fear. She's learning that even though she is scared, she can handle it. Researchers call that ability emotion regulation, and think that when dads are around as children are experiencing these intense emotions, they can use that opportunity to talk to them about those emotions, to help them accept and manage those emotions. This is even more pronounced in competitive play. Something tells me that this child's chances of pulling off the upset are pretty slim, right? But that's part of the real world, isn't it? Sure, we win sometimes, and when dads let kids win, they can use that opportunity to teach their children how to win with grace. But we all lose sometimes. And when dads win, they're giving their children a bite-sized taste of the big, bad world beyond the home, a world in which we all lose sometimes. But if this dad can use that opportunity to talk to his child about the frustration of losing, he can help that child learn to be resilient and stay calm instead of throwing a tantrum. And if he can do that, if the child can stay calm, he gets to keep playing with dad. And because the child wants to do that, he's really motivated to learn that lesson. But it's not just in rough and tumble or competitive play, where dads are more likely than moms to let their children experience a bit of fear or frustration. They're also more likely to encourage their children to take risks. My youngest daughter first climbed this swing set by herself when she was barely 5 years old, and I love it. And dads are more likely than moms to allow their children to do things that might get them hurt. But for a lot of dads, that's a calculated risk. The possibility of a bruise is an acceptable price to pay for seeing children push themselves to the absolute limits of their ability and develop the confidence that they're going to need to succeed in a world like ours, a culture like ours, that favors the bold. There are risks, of course. Children are more likely to get hurt playing with dad than with mom. And additionally, if dads don't set clear limits that keep things from getting out of hand, then encouraging reckless behavior can actually predict increases in children's aggression. But research also shows that dads who can strike that balance between allowing children to take risks and being safe have children who are less depressed, less anxious, and more independent than children of protective dads. And these children have confidence, perhaps because they've had experiences with dad where they learn that they can do these grown-up things by themselves and be safe. And any parents in the room know there is nothing a young child loves more than showing just how mature that they can be. And all of these are important lessons for children to learn as they're navigating their worlds. Knowing how to manage some fear, to win with grace, to stay calm in the face of defeat, are all going to help children succeed. After all, on the playground, children who can weather emotional storms just make good friends. So fathers aren't only linguistic bridges. They seem to be social bridges as well. They scaffold children through fear and frustration into competence and maturity. And dads seem to revel in filling this role of a bridge. But let me be clear, just because dads often choose to fill that role of bridge doesn't mean that bridges must be fathers. Moms are as capable of scaffolding children's risk-taking as dads are of learning how to change a diaper. There isn't anything about helping children learn to stay calm in the face of fear and frustration that is necessarily restricted to men. Now, it is true that decades of research shows that mothers' ability to be a calm, comforting, secure base for children in times of distress is critically important for child development. But moms aren't limited to that. And I first learned this from my mom growing up, who always encouraged me to take risks. In fact, I told her about the research where a lot of families choose these roles, where the mom chooses to be the more comforting one, dad chooses to encourage risk-taking, and she replied, "Oh, that makes total sense. I've just been a father all this time." And it's true. My mother remains the best father I have ever known. So the wide variety of human experience shows us that bridges need not be dads, but also that dads need not be bridges. And I think the next generation of fathers understands this. Just this last fall, I asked my students how many of them would be willing to give up a career to be a stay-at-home dad, to take on this more traditionally maternal role. I couldn't even get the question out before this big rugby player in the back of the class threw both hands up into the air and a huge grin spread across his face. He was excited to stay home with the baby. And he was joined by over a third of my class. So, how do we make sense of this? How can we make sense of research showing that dads bridge children to the outside world, but that this role is neither necessary nor exclusive to dads? What it provides is some guidance to men who come into fatherhood unclear of what it means to be a dad. Men who had fathers who didn't help them manage their fear and frustration, didn't help them build their emotional intelligence, or who, like myself, have never met their biological fathers, who know that we want to be sources for good in our children's lives, but aren't always sure how to do that. What it suggests is that engaging in roughhousing or competitive play or encouraging risk-taking can all be fantastic, as long as your goal is to help children accept and work through those emotions and build their emotional intelligence. I'm reminded of a quote I once heard from the award-winning psychology professor Charles Brewer. He said that if you don't know where you're going, the probability that you'll get there borders on randomness. For men like me, who come into fatherhood not knowing where we're going, understanding that we can be bridges for our children can give us that first destination on the way to a more fully engaged kind of fatherhood. Perhaps by knowing that we can be the ones to help our children accept their emotions. We can be the ones to scaffold their emotional intelligence. We can better prepare them for a successful life beyond our home. And if we can do that, we can follow my students as they bridge all of us to a brighter future for fathers and for children. Thank you.